What's up, y'all? How y'all doing today? My name is Wyatt, the aesthetic cowboy, and we have,
Melissa Gibbon, the queen of aesthetics.
and so we were super excited to start this podcast. I work for AMP. I specialize in our biologics division, and just the reason I'm doing this is I really want to help people answer a ton of questions and just tell the real truth. And Missy, I think you're right around there exactly with me why we're doing this.
Right. So I've been in the aesthetic space for over 26 years. And especially these days with social media and TikTok and all the BS out there, I think there's just a lot of misconceptions in aesthetics and in regenerative medicine in general. And so we wanted to create a space where we can just really talk about the real facts behind what's going on in the aesthetics and regenerative space. No BS, and just lay down some facts and hopefully help people kind of decipher what's real versus what's hype.
Absolutely, 100%. And that's gonna kind of lead us into our first segment. Um, you know, peptides have become such a big word, and for me, I'll be honest, like I don't know much about it. I don't know much about it, and that's why I'm super excited to talk to Missy today about that, to answer these questions that we've reached out to folks. A ton of questions like what's important.
Peptides is a really gray area. It's a very exciting new area of regenerative medicine, and I've currently been on peptides myself for about 2 years. I kind of make myself a lab rat before I offer it to my patients just to make sure that it's not hype, it is safe, it is effective. And so, I always say I donate my friends and family's bodies to science before I do it to my patients. So I do think there's a lot of misconceptions and just confusion in the peptide space area. And so as a nurse practitioner, I really want to clear some of these things up and just hopefully just be a guide for people that are interested maybe in trying peptide therapy and kind of offer just some of things that I've learned. And I'm by no means an expert, but I've literally self-studied this for the last year of my life. And so I can bring, to light what's actually working for my patients and in clinical practice and what we see with actual data of how people are feeling every single day.
Love it. Yep, and this is why we're going to do this. So, first question we have: what are peptides and how do they work?
So, Wyatt, the short answer of what a peptide is they're proteins. They're short chain amino acids. And so what does this mean? Is means that they are cell signalers. And so they can help with many different areas of medicine. So whether people are wanting to, something for fat loss or healing or for skin or energy or libido or muscle recovery or chronic inflammation, the list goes on and on. So I think, we're not going to be really focusing today on GLP-1s, which is a whole nother podcast itself. And that's a
Yes.
weight loss peptides, right? But today we're going to be talking about all the other healing peptides and peptides that are in the regenerative space. And so, yeah, that's pretty much what they are. Is they're proteins and they're short chain amino acids that are cell signalers to your body to do something.
And I know, like so they were saying about the peptides, I mean, help with fat loss, I mean, sleep, healing, skin, energy, kind of like we just went over there as well. But, like, one question we had here is which peptide is right for the specific goal?
So that's a good question. So I think that in order to get on the correct peptides, it's important for the patient to have a discussion with their provider and go over what their symptoms are, what their goals are, maybe what some of their health history is. And so different peptides have different actions. And so they work in many different pathways in the body. And so whether we're trying to heal something or uh, cause some sort of growth hormone response or metabolic response, we really just need to dive in as far as what's actually going on with the patient and then go from there. So it's not just one size fits all, and there's so many different peptides and they all have very specific functions. And you can combine some of those peptides and then those become what's called polypeptide chains. And some of those peptides work really well together, but a lot of times those peptides need to not be taken together. And so to me, I think that's also very important, is because, just a couple of days ago, I heard my brother-in-law say, yeah, I ordered from this pharmacy online. And I was just like, oh my God, how much time do you have? Because you really need to know what you're putting in your body, and you don't need to be self-diagnosing or self-prescribing. So first and foremost, contact a healthcare provider or someone that's in functional medicine that knows peptides and that can regulate and do a really good patient assessment as to what you actually need, and also monitor that as well.
And then that kind of goes into this question too, is like, a couple really good questions that we had from folks is which labs should get before starting? And are peptides safe for me to use based on my health history? This is a big question a lot of folks get too.
So I will say that let's start with the one on health history. I think if there is a patient that has a history of cancer or autoimmune issues or insulin resistant issues, you really want to be conscientious of those types of health histories because these peptides are messengers and they will cause cellular turnover, but they will replicate good cells or bad cells. And so it's important to make sure that they are safe based on your health history. And so that's why it's important to have a consultation with your healthcare provider. And with that being said, there are labs for some of the peptides that are on the market, but the others are just based on symptoms. And so some very basic labs, and this isn't inclusive of all the lab testing that we do, but we can do IGF-1 testing, we can do fasting insulin, A1C, thyroid, CRP testing, and we can do inflammatory marker testing. So there are some lab tests that do coincide with peptide therapy, but we also do this just based on symptoms. So, it's kind of a fine dance between doing both.
Right, and that's one question I actually had too is like, I mean, I'm not sure, but it depends on the peptides. Are there different side effects that folks will experience from this, or could it just kind of vary once again on the patient? Or
So, with peptide therapy, I mean, the most common thing that we hear and that happened to me are going to be just injection site, maybe swelling or itching, or maybe a little rash. Some patients can complain of like flushing or headaches. You're going to get an IGF elevation and sometimes too, which can be a side effect. But you just want to make sure that it's not anything that's more serious than that. But those are kind of the common side effects of injecting peptide.
and then I mean, this is a question I have too, is these patients, do you see this on a daily basis, or is it just kind of throughout the month, or, like say with maybe the headaches, or if there's any nausea or anything like that?
So we see more nausea with our GLP, GIP-1 and peptides, and so we'll talk about that in another podcast because we can do an entire
We can
podcast
we
on
do
weight loss
bunch.
peptides, right? But I will say personally, every single time that I inject CJC 1295, which is an acronym, and we'll talk about more about that in a little bit, but I get itching and a little bit of swelling at the site of injection. And you do kind of alternate the sites of injections around the umbilicus, around the belly button. But you inject it every day, and every single day I do get that side effect. So it's just something that I've learned to live with.
Okay, awesome. Um, Next question we have so this is something very interesting as well because I know they are different. I mean, what form am I taking? Is it injectable, oral, nasal, topical? And I guess so you said which form is actually effective? Because there's many that I believe that aren't, correct?
That is correct. So you'll see a bunch of pill form or oral form online of peptide therapy. And being a nurse practitioner, I really feel like the best route to take peptides is going to be through IM, which is intramuscular, or subcutaneous, which is injecting into the fat. And so those are both injectable forms of peptides. Some are taken orally or can be taken orally, but from, an absorption rate and absorption, I think that just taking them IM or sub-Q is the best route in order to get peptides actually that can become readily available to the system and to the body.
Because I know a lot of things that are out there too. Taking those orally, they do have a lot more side effects, from my understanding, but I could be wrong on that too.
No, they do, or they're just not absorbed because
They're
when you
not
take
absorbed. Yeah,
anything in pill form, it has lots of binders in it, and even down to how the pill is made. If the silica is not absorbed and it can't be processed in your gut, and by the time that it's flushed out, then you're not really absorbing anything. At that point, I just tell people you just kind of have expensive urine, right? But if it's
yeah.
not getting to the cellular level and it's not absorbed, I mean, that's not effective. And so we want to do something that's actually absorbed very quickly into the bloodstream and can actually be effective to the body. And now that's an interesting thing about peptides, and it's something that I think is a kind of a controversial topic is a lot of these peptides are actually made in the gut. For example, BPC 157, which is body protective compound. And what what that BPC-157 is actually manufactured in the gut. And so, but it's one of the peptides that we use for healing. And so, one of the controversial topics you'll hear about is how then does the body know to get that amino acid from the gut into, let's say, if I have an injured shoulder, like how does it know to go from my gut to my shoulder in order to heal? Which becomes another controversial topic of, well, then am I supposed to inject that into my belly or am I supposed to
Or
inject that into the
yeah.
site that's injured, right? And so, and we do both, honestly, in our practice. So, we will inject in the site of an injury, and we see lots of athletes in our practice and you can do both. And I will say if it's injected into the site or around the site of injury, it is a little bit more intense pain-wise, and so there's some stinging associated post-injection. But I've also found that it's still super effective just to inject it into the tissue around the belly button systemically, and then it ends up finding its way to the site of injury. And that is something we just really don't know how it finds that site of injury. And I think that's still kind of being, debated amongst physicians and nurses. But, it's pretty impressive that it knows how to, exit the gut and go to the site of injury.
Awesome. Awesome. And some of these are really basic. They're kind of more basic questions, but I do like them because this is why we're doing this to educate folks just on the big stuff, the little stuff. How do I store them? Does timing matter? When should you take? Is it morning, night? And then how long before I see results? This has been asked a lot of times.
Right? So, let's start with, does timing matter? It does matter depending on which peptide you're taking. So, I cringe whenever I see that people are taking all their peptides at night because some are more readily available in the morning and should be taken in the morning, and then some should be taken at night. And so that's why it's also important not to go to an online compounding pharmacy that doesn't have a physician attached to it or a research lab, which I'll talk about in a minute because I feel it's super important to know the difference in these types of labs. But it does matter whether you're taking in the morning or at night, depending on which peptide it is. And also make sure that you're taking it on an empty stomach. Some of these, have food interactions or can be blocked by food. And exercise and timing is super important with these peptides. So, yes, they do have a time of day that is best taken, depending on which peptide they are. And then I think the next question that you asked was how long until you see results?
That's
And so
correct.
this is gonna vary. So some peptides you'll see results with just in a few days, and that's peptides like the BPC-157, which is a recovery a peptide that I was talking about earlier. And then some of them take weeks, and then some of them, you'll see if they're growth hormone type peptides or they mimic that release of growth hormone, it's gonna take a few months. So, and even ones like GHKCU, which are peptides for skin, hair, and nails, those do take a few more months to actually see the results. So no, it's not a magic bullet. You're not gonna see results next week,
Right.
unfortunately, with all of them, and they do need to be stored in the refrigerator once they're
Okay.
reconstituted.
That's
Yeah,
okay.
so what reconstitution literally means is it comes in a powder form, you add the bacteriostatic water, once it's liquid, it needs to be stored in the fridge. So,
Perfect. And next couple questions we have here is we kind of spoke a little bit about this. Do I combine peptides or take them alone? And another one after this, and you can start with this one first, was when should I recheck my labs? I know we spoke about this a little bit before, but yeah, I like this. Safe stacks versus combinations to avoid.
so, anytime you mix peptides together, it becomes a polypeptide. And some of those peptides play really nicely together and can be paired. For example, CJC 1295 with ipamorelin. That's one that can go and stack really well together. BPC 157 with TB 500 is also a stack that works really well together. And those are just two very basic ones. That's not the only ones that can be paired. But yes, some peptides play well together. And then some peptides don't need to be put together because some have a very short half life. And if they're very similar peptides and they just don't work well together, or it's going to shorten the half life of them to be placed together, it's better for them to be taken separately and not mixed together. And so, that's something that another thing that I see when I'm like, oh my gosh, this person's taking all their peptides in one syringe and they shouldn't even be mixing them together. So, some play well together and some don't. That's why it's important to go to someone that's very well versed in peptides and can kind of guide you through that.
Yeah, so I mean, like I say, it's super important, to reach out, recheck with your labs and so forth, and
It's
continue.
complicated. I mean, even like patients, ask, do I have to cycle off of these? Can I use them continually? And depending on what our goals are and what peptides they are, they do need to be cycled off of. And, once we check labs and see where they are, you do want to cycle off of some of these peptides. So it's not something that you just stay on indefinitely. So that's also super important to know.
Okay, and that is what I was gonna ask is, like, how long can you literally stay on these peptides? How long can I mean, is there a time frame, or is it just based on the patient, or what's your thoughts on this?
So it really depends on the peptide that you're taking. But typically we cycle on like 3 months on and then we'll do a cycle off. But it depends on the specific peptide stack that the patient's taking as to whether or not how long you stay on versus off. Because, for example, if you're doing a recovery stack, then you're going to stay on continuously for a certain amount of time, and then you're going to end it for a certain amount of time. And then other peptides, most of the peptides you take 5 out of 7 days. So a lot of patients will take them Monday through Friday and then not take them Saturday and Sunday. And so it really just depends on which peptide you're talking about as to whether or not you stay on them continuous through the cycle of healing and then you get off, or if we're doing more of like a growth hormone mimicking peptide where you're going to cycle on it for 3 months and then cycle off of it.
This is all amazing stuff right here. Golly. So the question next, I mean, we've got a couple more questions here. Where this question came from out of South Carolina, actually. How do I know if a peptide source is reputable?
Dun, dun, dun. Well, this is the other thing that kind of gets in my crawl, for lack of better terms. But peptide, and I get this question all the time. First of all, I have patients come in and say, I found this peptide online for 200 bucks. And the first question I ask them is this a research lab or is this a compounding pharmacy? There is a big difference. And so, without going too much in the weeds of what that means, is during the manufacturing process of these peptides, there are things that need to be removed from the peptides in order for them to be safe when injected into your body. And so the way that research labs are getting around being FDA cleared or what's called 503A or 503B um, type of dispensing pharmacy is that all they have to say, Wyatt, is not intended for human use. And if they say that, they do not meet those purity standards that are met by compounding pharmacies that have those regulations. And so then they become a chemical distributor. So they are not even regulated by the same standards. And so, that's all they have to do. So you want to make sure that they're 503A or 503B facilities because that really makes a difference in, potency, um, purity,
Side
facility,
effects, maybe? Yeah.
correct dosing, safety. You just want to make sure that you're with a clinical and supervised program and just have someone that knows exactly what type of pharmacies. Because if you're using a chemical supplier, that is the loophole in the law. And so let me reemphasize that. If they put on their bottles not for human use, then they become not a pharmacy, they become a chemical supplier, which means it is a loophole in the law. So it is not illegal for them to sell you peptides from their manufacturing facility to your home. What you will find is if you order from some of these chemical suppliers, because I did it on purpose because I wanted to see for myself, they usually do not come with any sort of instructions on how to use them. So then people are chat GTPing their medications. And that is scary because that is not necessarily truthful information once they get it. And so we even have patients call our practice all the time that are not our patients saying, I ordered this product from, online and I need to know how to dose it. And we absolutely can't help them because I'm not going to give someone information on a drug that I did not give them or I do not know what pharmacy did give that to them. And so it's just super important that we make sure that we're using a reputable compounding pharmacy that has regulations, that it's not a chemical supplier. That's insanity.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I've seen, like, some sending that directly to the patient's the home, and no one's checking in on them, checking in on their progress, how this going, everything like that, which I find just wild and not very supportive to the patient.
Well, and if we're not practicing medicine, if we're not getting their labs, if we're not looking at their IGF-1, if we're not looking at their insulin, if we're not looking at the thyroid, if they're not looking at their cortisol levels, if we're not looking at their CRP levels, if we're not looking at their vitamin D levels and their CBC and their inflammatory markers and their lipid panels, you know, their HSCRP levels. I mean, I can go on and on. So, yes, it is the practice of medicine, and it does need to be under, a compounding pharmacy that is a 503A or a 503B compounding pharmacy that is intended for human use and not for human use. And you want to have someone check in on you, because how the heck would you know if you even need the
Right.
medication if we're not monitoring it? That's
Right.
that's just lunacy.
Yep. 100%. And the last one of the last questions we have here, and we've kind of touched on a little bit, but what results are realistic and what's not? Like, of course, overhyping things, right?
Overhyping things, right? So
Yeah.
I love when I see on Instagram these like bodybuilder models that are like, I'm taking BPC 157 and TB 500 and CJC 1295 and GHKCU, and I'm 65. Look at my body. Well, what they're not saying is, and I also work out 2 hours every day, Monday through Sunday, and I don't drink alcohol and I don't ever eat a carb. Let's be real, right? I am 48 years old and I exercise 3 times a week if I have a really good week, because I'm a very busy mom of two and run a couple of different businesses. And I will say that these peptides have helped me feel a lot better. They have lowered the chronic inflammation in my body. I am able to build more lean muscle mass, and there is a place for them. And I do have improved sleep, and I have looked at my osteoporosis levels. And so I do know that there are huge benefits. But as far as it being a magic bullet and you going from, being a stick figure to a physique model overnight or within a couple of months, that's just not realistic. So, but they will see results in a couple of weeks to a couple of months if they're consistent. The other thing, Wyatt, is that people are not consistent with these medications. They'll, well, I travel, I can't travel with them, or I took them Monday and Tuesday, but I forgot Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. But I will say we have patients that are even on like our heart protocols or our cholesterol lowering protocols. And if these patients are consistent in 12 weeks when we redraw their labs, the miraculous thing is a lot of them are getting off of their blood pressure medications, their cholesterol lowering
Wow.
medications. And so this is real science, and this is when it really works. If you have someone that's very compliant with their medications and that are willing to meet you halfway and exercise moderately and really, monitor their lifestyles moderately, I do think that these peptides are next gen in medicine. And I really think that they have a space in this regenerative place that is going to increase longevity, hopefully. But, to live well is to die well. So I think if we can just feel better longer, then I think we've won.
Right. And one thing to ask on that too is like if, say if someone doesn't take them for a couple of days or something like that, is that going to be a negative? Or are you talking more if it's 3, 4, 5 days? That's just, and maybe you do or don't know that answer, but I just wanted to see. That's a question I just thought of right now.
No, I like it. It's just like taking a multivitamin. If you take vitamin D and calcium, and is your bone density going to be better if you take it once a week versus prescribed every day? So same holds true for peptides, right? So consistency is key. And so I think if you're traveling, you have to learn kind of how to travel with it in travel packs, and that's something that we kind of mastered at our practice, because a lot of our patients do travel for work, and so it's not impossible. It just takes a little bit more dedication to, making a plan for that. But I think consistency is key. It's not going to have any sort of negative effect on them. It's just not going to have, you know, the effects it could have if they were consistent with it.
Awesome. Awesome. Let's see if we have any more questions here today. Um, This has been super educational. This is why we're doing this. Help people, educate them. Missy, do you have anything else you'd like to add onto this podcast? Because this is our first one.
It
We've been
is
talking
our
a
first
lot
one.
of, yeah, yeah, yeah. It's exciting. Anything else you'd like to add about peptides before we kind of signal off and
Well, I
get
mean, this
ready
looks
to
like
launch our other one?
This is like a very basic conversation, but I think it's a start of many other conversations that we can have around peptide therapies. So, I mean, I can go super nerd on you and talk about all the different peptides, and maybe that's something we do, or maybe we do another podcast on just the top 10 peptides, like what's trending and what top 10 peptides are trending right now. And that's another question that we get in our practice. And so I think that this is a great starting point. I think the most important takeaways from this podcast would be, you know, is to see a provider that specializes in peptide therapies, and to figure out, what your goals are. Maybe look at some lab work depending on what your symptoms are. and making sure that you're getting these peptides from a reputable pharmacy and not somewhere that's, just a chemical supplier, right? And so you want to make sure that you're getting a good medication from a reputable pharmacy and you have a good plan because it's all in the plan.
Absolutely. I think that's super important. Absolutely. Well, I'm very excited. I mean, we're gonna be talking about all things in aesthetics. We're gonna talk about life. We're gonna talk about all kinds of stuff, y'all. So that's why, this is the cowboy and the queen aesthetics, this is why we gonna do this.
I
So
love it. All right. Well, thanks for joining us today on Cowboy and the Queen of Aesthetics. We'll be back with you next week. I'm not sure exactly what the topic next week is going to be. We're going to let you guys decide that. And you can go to our Instagram pages to figure out what you want to know about next. So stay tuned and we'll let you guide what you hear about next in aesthetic medicine.
can't wait to see y'all next time. It's gonna be a great time. Here you
Thanks for
go.
joining us.
Thank y'all.